Well, I shall start again. Well, hello everybody, and this is my first talk as an AWS person. The last time I gave a talk at a JeffConf, I was a non-AWS person, and I made a joke at that time that I didn't work for AWS yet, and since then I've joined AWS. I am the AWS Senior Developer Advocate for Serverless. I am based in London, and I am, as it says there, obsessed with serverless. It's my job now to go around, to build up the community, to grow the community, and to go and talk about, blog about, and generally enthuse about serverless in as many ways as I can, to as many people as I can, and tell everyone how great AWS and serverless is. So, I am a blogger and a tweeter. My details are there, so you can email me at that email address there. My Twitter is Paul D. Johnston. It's the same as my blogger. And I'm also the co-founder of the JeffConf series of conferences. Although it wasn't originally a series of conferences, it was just one. This is now the third one. And I'm the originator of the Jeff meme. I am really hoping that we come up with a better name pretty soon. Because we need one. So, I come at serverless from a slightly different perspective to most people. I was formerly a CTO. I was formerly the CTO of a company called Movivo. And before that, I was the CTO was a consultant CTO for a number of organizations. And that means that you are looking at the organizational side of things. You're looking at the business side of technology. You are not purely looking at things from a technology point of view. It's great to be able to do some clever and cool things with these technologies, and it's nice to be able to understand how to be able to make the best of your code at different times. But you've still got to be able to be a pragmatist, and you've still got to be able to understand how your functions work in the best way and the financial impact of the kinds of things that you're doing. And that's what a CTO is going to do. Very much a strategic role in understanding how technology works and how it impacts on a business. And so when I talk about functions, when I talk about serverless, I'm very much talking about it from the perspective of a CTO, and I've brought that into my role at AWS. So when we talk about serverless, we talk about it in this way. We talk about it from the point of view of not managing servers. I come from a background of having done EC2 servers for 10 years, and prior to that being a sysadmin 20 years ago, which meant that I had to SSH into actual physical boxes in data centers. I even remember having to take physical keyboards into buildings and plug things in. And that means, I remember the pain of doing that. And the point is, you get rid of all of that pain. That's what serverless is all about for us. It's also about flexible scaling. It means going from something where you're not having to worry about whether or not you can cope with a load. It's just going to expand and do what you want, up to what you scale it to. So you can actually control whether you want it to scale and how far you want it to scale, but it will go as far as you want. We also talk about idle capacity. Now, one of the things that we try to explain is that serverless is about not having idle capacity. We're not provisioning anything here. We're not trying to say you've got to have at least one. There's no idle capacity. If there's nothing there, if there's nobody using it, there's nothing running. And we also talk about high availability and fault tolerance. So if something fails in your function, there will always be another one coming forwards. It's not going to sit there and then ruin your entire day. There will always be another function coming along behind it to keep going. So your systems are highly available and fault tolerant. A kind of quick and simple way of looking at it is you can go from 0 to 100 and back to 0 again without changing anything. That's the kind of idea about what serverless is about for us. So let's have a quick look at the anatomy of a serverless function, the anatomy of a serverless application. So a function is right at the middle of a serverless application. So the Lambda function here, which can run Node or Python or Java or C# or Go. Very, very simple. It's a single function. It runs one method, and it's triggered by an invocation. So somewhere in the system, an event happens, and that triggers the invocation of the function. That function then runs. It can talk to a bunch of other services. It can just do some compute and return. It doesn't have to do anything. It doesn't matter what it does. But those event sources are actually the key. Really important that you can work on changes in state or endpoints. So those endpoints may come from something like API gateway, or they can be changes in resource state. And that's the kind of thing we're going to be talking about in this talk. So we've had a lot of talks about some of the common serverless use cases over the last few years. And we've talked about web applications. So backends to static websites come from things like S3, so simple storage service. So they can be just simple static websites running as public folders, and then you're allowed to then put domains in front of it, and that's a very simple serverless application. Backends, you've got Amazon API Gateway, and that allows you to run Lambda Functions behind it, and that gives you a very simple backend to a website. And then you've got data processing, so we've got Kinesis and Kinesis Analytics. And then you've got chatbots, and we've had a few conversations about that around Slack and Slack messaging. And then we've had Alexa, and Alexa gives us skills, and skills are running on Lambda. And now we've talked about IT automation as well. And IT automation allows you to do some interesting things around your business. And your business is where we're going to go today. Because we're not really going to be talking about how to do a Lambda function today. Because Lambda functions are really key to how you can make serverless work for a business. So you remember I talked about event sources and how event sources are really important for a function. Because functions don't just run on their own. They don't just happen. There's always an event that invokes the function. What kind of events are there? Now, we know that there are some events that we've seen examples of before. So with Amazon S3, we've seen an event. If you put an object into a bucket, you can trigger a Lambda function, such as if you're doing image processing. You can do things with Amazon DynamoDB. If you put a document into a DynamoDB database, then you can trigger a Lambda function, and you can work on the document that you just put into the database. Amazon API Gateway is an HTTP call, comes into an endpoint, and then that endpoint then points straight to a Lambda function, very simple, and it goes straight in. But the bit that we're going to talk about is the bit at the bottom here. So we're going to look at the development and management tools and the event and messaging services. And we're going to kind of look at how can serverless applications help manage development. Because there are three very simple ways that Lambda and serverless applications can actually help you with your business and your organizations. It's not simply about building front-facing applications or mobile backends, because there are other ways that we can approach those, and there are other talks that you can look at. But we're going to look at this from a slightly different perspective today. And the first we okay? Yep, we'll carry on. And so the first we're going to look at is event sources. So these are things that happen within your AWS account. That there are events that will trigger Lambda functions or can trigger Lambda functions, and then we can do something off. And then we're going to look at how you can take your internal processes and turn them into something you can create events out of to then do something in your systems. And then we're going to look at how you can do work in your systems from external events. So the first one we're going to look at is AWS event sources. So there are some really powerful management event sources within AWS. The first is AWS Code Commit. So we all know that we should be running CI/CD, and we've looked at things like pushing to branches within code repositories. But did you know that you can actually run Lambda functions when you push to a branch in AWS Code Commit, or when you create or delete a branch? Now, there are tools out there that allow you to do various different things in various different ways. But you can use Lambda to create, for example, you could trigger a completely new environment or use CloudFormation to build an infrastructure and test a scenario off the basis of a push to a new branch. It would be a relatively simple thing to generate, so long as there was CloudFormation in the branch, for example. It's an event that's sitting there and waiting to be used. Or you've got something like AWS CloudTrail, which is another part of our infrastructure. So, and Amazon, you push events into Amazon S3, and then you can, because CloudTrail records all data into an S3 bucket, you can then do some analytics on what's going on in your AWS account. So, for example, you could find out that one of your developers was logging into the account after hours regularly for 6 weeks. You may find that that developer was not doing his job very well, or there was something wrong, and you might find that that wasn't an optimum way for him to work or her to work. And so you might want to find out why that was and deal with it. And you may not know that that's happening if you didn't have that kind of analytics going on. It's not necessarily an obvious management function, but it's a Lambda function that you could create that would give you some value and could help you. Or AWS Config, which is a very useful tool. It's the tool that Netflix uses to be able to check whether their EC2 instances are configured correctly and compliant with their own processes. So when they start up an EC2 instance, they will run this Lambda function that will then check whether this EC2 instance conforms to what they want it to. And if it doesn't, it will then send a message to say this doesn't, and they will destroy it. It's really useful to make sure that you can create a compliant infrastructure for your organization. And the tools are already there and available for you to do this. And within AWS, you've also got CloudWatch, Amazon CloudWatch event patterns. So we'll come to another part of CloudWatch events later. But there is CloudWatch event patterns, which can trigger off various different AWS events, which is linked to CloudTrail. And these things like console sign-in events or CloudFormation events, and there is even the possibility you could, if you, for example, upload a Lambda function, you can then trigger another Lambda function to do something else. Why you would want to, I don't know, but you might want to. But the events are available within the system, so you can start to generate your own workflows from actions within the system. So let's have a little bit of a think about your organization and your organizational specifics. So every organization is different. Not every organization has the same workflows and processes. So how do we work through these? So let's have a think about step functions. Step functions are a particularly good way of taking a process that is in an organization and making it automated. It's because it's a stepwise system. It allows you to manage state, and it's one of the most interesting things about step functions that I've come across is that you can actually include manual steps. You don't have to have it completely automated. So an example that I've seen is that you can have a step function send an email and wait for a manager to provide a response via a click, either a positive or a negative click in an email. So you don't have to have something that is fully automated, you can't have manual steps. So that means that you can use step functions to provide organizationally specific events within your system. And I said we'd come back to CloudWatch events. And this is, again, part of CloudWatch's events system. You can run events just like you would with a cron job without having to run a server. And you can run events from 1 minute up to a year. And these can run step functions or Lambda functions or actually a number of other different types of AWS event. And this is useful for things like automation and processes or sending an email at a specific time and regularly. But this is part of the system, and this is part of the toolkit that is provided to you and is already there and gives you the options to create serverless automations within the system that you don't have to think about managing longer term. So one of the final thing we're going to look at is external webhooks. Now, this might seem a little strange in terms of serverless solutions, but Amazon API Gateway provides you with a very powerful way of connecting with a third party. Now, third-party providers provide you with webhooks. Webhooks are very simple. All they are is someone over there, something happens, this third party, something happens, and then they will trigger a call to an HTTP endpoint. And if they point to an HTTP endpoint that you have set up within Amazon API Gateway, that can then trigger an event, which then triggers a Lambda function. And that Lambda function can then do some work, do some compute within your system. That's an incredibly simple webhook integration, but it's an incredibly powerful one, because we know that various different things happen externally to our system, but we want to find out about them as quickly as possible and then have those things happen internally within systems that we control. So if we can get that information into AWS as quickly as possible and then trigger a Lambda function, we can do some work on it as quickly as possible. So a very, very simple example is a Slackbot. So for example, a Slack custom / command. It's a very simple thing to do. It's a very simple thing to set up with Slack. All that happens is it sends an HTTP post command when you run it to Amazon API Gateway as a webhook, and then it goes straight into a Lambda function. This is about the simplest Amazon solution that you can put up on a slide, I'm pretty sure. I don't know if there's anything simpler. But that is about as easy as it gets. And then you can do something from that very easily to then do work in your system. You can even send information back to Slack if you want to. An example from a customer is Starling Bank in the UK. They're a startup digital-only bank. And they use Slackbot to do something which is actually quite interesting and unusual. And they automate privilege management across their accounts. So they have multiple user accounts, multiple AWS accounts, one of which is the user account. So you only log into one account as a developer within Starling Bank. And to gain access to the other accounts, you have to go into their Slack account, go into Slack and type in, give me access to this account. And then the Slack bot will go to API Gateway, and then it will go to AWS Lambda, which will then go to IAM. It will then give the user the permissions, come back to Lambda, and then we'll go back to Slack and say, you now have permissions. So the user will then log in to the new AWS account, do the work that they need to do, go back to Slack, and then say, revoke the permissions. And the same process will happen. Amazon API Gateway, Lambda, and then IAM, and then it will revoke the permissions and say, and that will complete. But they essentially use Slack and a very simple Slack interface as their way of managing privileges within their AWS accounts. That isn't a normal serverless application that we talk about very many times. But I think it's one we need to talk about more, simply because I think it's a very powerful way that we can use serverless applications as a business tool and as an organizational tool. And I think it's one we need to talk more about. So what are the kind of takeaways that we need to think about from this? So there are AWS events that can provide your organization with far greater insight into what's happening within your AWS account, but also what's happening with your business and with the technology. It's very possible for you to develop workflows and automate your systems around your organization's existing patterns using things like Step Functions and CloudWatch scheduled events. And the third-party tools and the webhooks and Slackbots, things like that, allow those third parties to generate events inside your own systems and inside your AWS environments that then allow you to trigger even more useful information and provide you with the ability to do some useful compute and give you even greater powers within your AWS ecosystem. For more information about serverless, this is the AWS serverless page. Go there. There's lots of information there, case studies, and a whole lot more. Thank you very much.